All right. Hello. Welcome back to another Trek Talk live stream here on Classic Comics. And hail to Lord Thoth. Hello, sir. Thank you for being here. Good to see you. Okay. So, this week's episode, this is the final episode of the first season. So, wrapping the first season up here, is, of course, Operation Annihilate. One of my personal favorites. And of course, as always, I'll be reading from Mark Cushman's book, These Are the Voyages, for some of the behind the scenes information. Now, oh, and please do like the stream if you're watching, and or if you're on a rewatch. And if you haven't, please do sub to the channel and maybe check out some of my other videos as well. I recently put out a video a few days ago. It's my top 5 list of best supervillains, Marvel supervillains for Batman, and it's done fairly well. I think it's at like 400, what 27, maybe. I think that's what it's at. Jellyfish, yeah, yeah. I always call this one. When I was a kid, I called this one the episode with the flying pancakes is what I called it, and Um, so anyway, yeah, this is the last episode of the first season. Now, what I'll do next week, I think, is originally I was going to do like a top 10 episodes thing, but I think instead what I'll do is I'm going to do one of those tiers. I'll do a tier ranking for the first season episodes. I think that'll be a little more fun than me just kind of saying, okay, here's 1 through 10. And I'll probably talk a little bit about what was happening with the show in the wake of the first season and how it was received and some of the success the show was having and how it was affecting the show going forward. And then I guess after that we'll dive into season 2. I don't see why not. Okay, so we'll go ahead and start here. Let me find my place. All right. So this episode, written by Stephen Karabatsos, with Roddenberry and Gene Coon doing some rewriting, and directed by Herschel Doherty. This is from an NBC press release from March 22nd, 1967. The USS Enterprise attempts to stem an epidemic of mass insanity that has already destroyed several planet colonies in Operation Annihilate on the NBC television network Star Trek. Arriving on the planet Deneva, which appears to be in the path of the spreading malady, Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock find Kirk's sister-in-law Aurelin and his nephew Peter in a near crazed condition and learns that his brother, a biologist, has already died. When Mr. Spock contracts the disease, Kirk appears to have no alternative but to annihilate the entire colony to prevent the infection of the entire galaxy. The creatures seem indestructible except in one regard. A Denovan piloting his spacecraft into that system's sun was freed of the parasite seconds before he and his ship burned up. Something in the sun killed it, but tests with heat, radiation, and gravity have been ineffective. Dr. McCoy believes light may be the answer, light as bright as the sun. But I don't know. It's Kirk that comes up with that, not Dr. McCoy, really. Spock, struggling against the creature that inhabits his body, is willing to be used as a guinea pig. The risk, the experiment could leave him blind. Uh, by science! Examined here the human's ability to manage pain, the burden of command, and the consequences of living with a tragically bad decision. Yeah, no kidding. The direction and the look of Operation Annihilate are above average. Many unique camera angles, especially on the bridge, add freshness. In addition, with the high stakes and the great personal battles waged and the performances are surprisingly reined in. Much credit goes to first time Star Trek director Herschel Doherty. Among the concepts that work are how the parasitic creatures have the ability to inject living tissue into the body of the host, which then invades the human nervous system, allowing the parasite to control its host with intense pain, and how each of these creatures are individual brain cells interconnected through thought transmission, creating a life form with great intellect but no hands for building. Their survival depends on human slaves to construct spaceships and allow it to travel the universe in search of new food sources. And Lothar says it was a fun episode. I don't know if fun is how I would describe it. I mean, it's an episode I really like, one of my favorites, but I don't know if fun. I mean, if you, if you think contemplating like potential like genocide is a possible fun thing. Hey, Adega. Hello, sir. Good to see you. Thank you for being here as always. This episode is also disturbing. It opens with a self deletion. Then Kirk discovers his brother dead. Then his sister in law dies in excruciating pain. You see, this is what I'm talking about. I mean, is this fun? Their son, Kirk's young nephew, is near death and in a coma. Spock is in agony. Then he's blinded. Kirk blames McCoy. McCoy blames himself. Finally, Kirk must make a decision that may blind or worse, kill a million people. Any of these elements could have carried a story. Combined, they leave this episode crowded and strangely unpleasant. Okay. All right. So we start out. The Enterprise is approaching planet Deneva and isn't receiving any response to their hails. The crew is investigating a pattern of mass insanity that has been cataloged on several planets in this part of space. They detect a ship flying directly into the Denovan sun. They try to catch the ship, but they arrive too late, and the ship with its occupant aboard burns up. As he dies, the pilot says that he is finally free. After they pull away from the sun, McCoy suggests that the mass insanity may have already reached Deneva. Then he reveals that Kirk's brother Sam and his family are stationed on Deneva. Uhura established contact with Deneva, and then Kirk recognizes the voice in the message as Aurelin, his sister in law. She pleads for help, saying she can't transmit for long or they will find out. Then the message gets cut off. When they approach Deneva, Kirk forms a landing party to investigate. Spock notes that they are detecting plenty of life readings, but notes that the population seems strangely quiet with very little activity going on. So they beam down to the streets, or to the planet, to find the streets empty, with Spock telling Kirk that all the inhabitants seem to be indoors, strangely quiescent. And then they're confronted by a group of colonists who come at them wielding clubs and warn the crew to leave. They stun the colonists with their phasers, and afterwards, Kirk and Spock both note that while acting aggressively, their words made it seem as if they didn't really want to harm the crew. Then they hear screaming, and they follow it, and they arrive at Sam Kirk's quarters, Kirk's brother, and find Aurelin screaming hysterically that they're here. McCoy has to sedate her. Then they find that Sam, Kirk's brother, is dead, and Peter, Kirk's nephew, is unconscious. And Sam Kirk is, of course, played by William Shatner, just wearing, I think, a wig and a fake mustache. I don't know. There may be some makeup there too. Kirk orders Spock to investigate what happened while he returns to the Enterprise with Aurelin and Peter. Now, on the ship, McCoy tells Kirk that he's not sure what has happened to them, only that they seem to be in extreme pain when unconscious. Kirk speaks to Aurelin trying to get answers. Now, she tells Kirk that they arrived about 8 or 9 months ago. When Kirk asks who, she only says things, horrible things. Then she begins screaming in agony, and McCoy asks to sedate her again. Aurelian says that they use the pain to control people, and they need people to serve as their arms and legs and build ships so that they can spread to other worlds. She implores Kirk to stop them, and then she dies. Now, Kirk beams back down to Deneva and asks Spock or the others if they've seen any kind of strange alien life forms. They say they haven't, but they did hear a strange buzzing sound that they were about to investigate when Kirk beamed down. So they go to take a look, and inside one of the buildings, they find creatures, which are, and of course, they look, people describe them different ways, kind of like jellyfish, as I think Lord Thoth said. Um, like I said, I always, when I was a kid, I called them flying pancakes. So now Spock, so these things can fly, right? And so they start flying around trying to attack the crew. So then Kirk orders that they fire phasers on maximum to kill these things. And while it seems to stun them, or at least one of them, it doesn't seem to kill them. No, because they should be vaporized completely, but they aren't. Now, Spock suggests collecting one as a specimen, but Kirk says, the situation in this room is too dangerous. We should withdraw and then, maybe reevaluate. So they start to leave, and then one of the creatures latches onto Spock's back. Kirk tears it away. They beam back up to the ship, and McCoy performs an operation on McCoy because they find a puncture wound on Spock's back. But after doing some exploratory surgery, McCoy discovers that there are these sort of tendrils, or what he calls alien tissue, that is now growing throughout Spock's body and is intertwined with his nervous system. And the intertwining of this new tissue is far too involved and pervasive for him to do any kind of surgical removal. So Spock awakens. Um, I'm sorry, rather, McCoy says he doesn't have any solutions right now and can't really do much for them. Now, Spock awakens and then goes to the bridge where he tries to take control of the ship. And McCoy has to sedate him again, and they take him back to sickbay. Spock awakens again and insists that the restraints are no longer necessary, arguing that he is able to control the pain, preventing the creatures from controlling him. Kirk's like, yeah, we'll just keep you here for a while, I think, and see how things pan out. And then they leave. Then Spock breaks free of his restraints and goes to the transporter room and orders Scotty to beam him down to Deneva. But Scotty says that Kirk has ordered no one is to beam down. Spock tries to overpower them, but Scotty pulls a phaser on him and then calls Captain Kirk down to the transporter room. Spock explains that they will need a specimen to examine, and since Spock is already infected, they can't do anything more to him, making him the logical choice to go down and procure one. Kirk reluctantly agrees and allows him to beam down. Now, down on the planet, Spock returns to that same spot they were in earlier where they found the creatures, and he phasers one of them and then procures the specimen and then returns to the ship. Now, back on the Enterprise, Spock reveals that the creature seems to be a single-celled organism, resembling a human nerve cell or neuron, an entirely different form of life that seems to be part of a larger whole and gaining strength from it. In essence, all the various creatures are like cells of a huge brain, and collectively they are kind of a single entity and a single consciousness. Now, Kirk orders Spock and McCoy to find a way to destroy the creatures without harming the human hosts. Later, McCoy admits that he isn't having any luck, and Kirk says they have to find a solution. The creatures can't be allowed to spread any further. And if they can't can't find a way to resolve this problem, Kirk may have to order the deaths of all 1 million colonists down on Deneva, and demands that McCoy and Spock find a solution. Yes, we are the Jellyborg. Yeah, it is reminiscent of that in a way, isn't it? In that it's a collective consciousness. Okay, so now later, Spock and McCoy have pretty much admitted defeat, saying that they've exhausted all the options that they could think of, with Kirk saying, "I want that third alternative." Now, having exhausted everything they can think of, intense heat, various types of radiation, intense gravity, etc., they can't think of anything else. Spock requests permission to beam down to Deneva with Kirk's nephew to await the colony's destruction. Kirk, of course, refuses this. Kirk notes then that uh, keeps noting that something in the Denovan sun killed these creatures. The Denovan said that they were gone and that he was free. Then Kirk ponders, what about visible light? The sun gives off bright light. Maybe that's what killed it. Spock agrees that it is possible, and McCoy sets up a test chamber to see if intense levels of bright light will affect the creatures. The test is performed on the creature, and it seems to work. The creature is killed. Kirk then says that they'll have to perform a test on a person who's been infected. Spock agrees, and he goes into the chamber to be subjected to the light as well. And of course, they subject him to the bright light. Now, after the test, Spock states that the test has worked and the alien influence is gone. But then he trips over the table or bumps into it and then says that he is now also completely blind. And then Chapel arrives with the results from the first test, which I don't know. Maybe it would have wanted to wait. Maybe it would have wanted to wait the additional maybe 10 minutes to see what the actual results of the test were before you go, okay, let's put a person in. So Chapel arrives with the results of the first test, and McCoy realizes that they didn't need to use the bright visible light, and so Spock didn't need to be blinded. And and Kirk is freaking pissed. He's just like, Bones, you stupid son of a bitch. Now, later, they release a series of satellites to bathe the planet in the proper light frequency, which appears to be some kind of a reddish light. They don't say, I'm tempted to think that it's supposed to be infrared light, but they never use the term infrared. And it is supposed to be visible light, so I guess it's just reddish light. Okay, but they bathe the colony and the whole planet in their frequency of light, and this kills the creatures, freeing the population from their influence. Afterwards, Spock arrives on the bridge and seems to be fine, and he reveals that Vulcans have an inner eyelid that they've evolved due to the brightness of Vulcan's sun. And as he says, we tend to never think of it, much as you ignore your own appendix. And Spock is immensely pleased with himself in this scene. He's just like, he's almost trolling them. And then McCoy asks Kirk not to tell him that he said Spock is the best first officer in the fleet, but Spock overhears. And thanks, Dr. McCoy. And it ends there. And as I said, directed by Herschel Doherty, written by Stephen Karabatsos, Joan Swift as Aurelin, and Yeoman Zara is the name of the yeoman that was in this one. Yeah, so and grade A, by the way, definitely. This is one of my favorite episodes, as I've said. Any episode that has scenes, a lot of scenes with these three guys all together, trying to resolve a problem. It's always just really great stuff. And those are, in my opinion, they tend to be the best episodes. And there's just, plenty of drama here. There's the stakes are really high. The only real complaints I have with the episode is the relative carelessness with which they go about the testing. As I say, I mean, wouldn't you? I mean, because they put Spock in and blind him, and then Chapel arrives like 2 minutes later with the test results from the first one, and it's, oh yeah, we didn't need to do that. Doe. I mean, you couldn't have waited 5-10 minutes. I mean, I understand they're on a clock, and they need to resolve the situation because they want to try and save, particularly I think they want to save Kirk's nephew. But yeah, I mean, it really is kind of sloppy in a way how they, and I understand why they did it because it's an hour long episode and they only have so much time and they have to resolve it. So if it weren't for that, I'd probably give it an A plus. Okay. So, in August of 1966, when Stephen Karabatsos was hired to serve as Star Trek's story editor, his contract also called for him to deliver one script of his own. With all the rewriting, including Court Martial, for which he received a co writing credit, Karabatsos had little time to begin an original script until early December when he was released from the in house staff and replaced by Dorothy Fontana. Operation Annihilate was not really my original idea, Karabatsos later said. Somebody gave me the idea, Roddenberry, I believe. The original idea or ideas can be traced to three different sources. Star Trek's 29th episode is in many ways reminiscent of Robert A. Heinlein's 1951 novel, The Puppet Masters. In Heinlein's story, people in the United States are being mentally controlled by slug like creatures that attach themselves to their hosts' backs. These aliens communicate with one another through direct conference, whereby their hosts sit back to back and the slugs partially merge. The humans are already inhabited by the aliens and they're being used to spread the invasion. Slugs are then sent through the mail in search of more hosts. And there was a film version of the Puppet Masters back in the 2000s, I believe it was. And I'm not sure about it, but I think that the Puppet Masters also was kind of like the inspiration for Invasion of the Body Snatchers. It's kind of, that's where the people who did the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers got the idea from, I think. Although there's clear differences in that story because there are no slugs and all that. The idea of controlling one's mind through pain was used in Star Trek before. Shimon Winselberg came up with the notion for Dagger of the Mind. What happens to Simon Van Gelder in that episode also happens to Areelan Kirk here. McCoy talks to Kirk about his sister-in-law, Areelan, saying when she answers questions, any questions, it's as though she has to fight to get the answers out, as though something is exerting pain to stop her. The idea that these creatures are, in a sense, individual brain cells, all in communication with one another and thereby combining to create a much larger entity, was taken from Jerry Soul's script, The Way of the Spores. Also in Soul's original story, not The Way of the Spore Drive, though, I don't think. Also in Soul's original story, but cut from that episode, Sulu beamed aboard the Enterprise and tried to commandeer the ship, much in the way that Spock does here. The writing staff was drawing elements cut from other scripts and placing them into this one. Karabatsos turned in his 19-page story outline on December 15th, 1966. It was far darker than the episode that was filmed. In this original summary, the people of Deneva are all on the verge of mass self-annihilation. In this early version of the story, as in the one film, Spock is a reluctant host for one of the creatures, but here Kirk and McCoy worry that he too may end himself. Hey, RRTNZ, good to see you, sir. Who knew that Flake Fake flying vomit puddles could be so dangerous. Yeah, it does kind of look like a rubber barf, doesn't it? It does kind of. Yeah, that's another thing I remember thinking when I was a kid. It looked like a fake barf, fake vomit. Um, okay, so Karabatos had Kirk agonize over the burden of his decision to kill all the men, women, and children on Deneva in order to stop these things from traveling to other worlds. Other than Spock, he does not have a personal stake in this. His brother, sister in law, and young nephew are not yet in the story. The weight on his shoulders, then, is the inner conflict as to what action to take, whether or not to kill millions of people. A line in the outline reads Kirk is seen to be walking down a dark and deserted corridor, wrestling with his conscience. And then, in what would have been the most startling ending of any Star Trek episode, Kirk uses the Enterprise's phasers to destroy everyone on Deneva. McCoy supports this and tells the captain, quote, it had to be done, Jim. Someone had to make the decision. You had no choice, unquote. The outline ends with Karabatsos writing, and as we fade out, we are left with the awful and vivid proportions involved in the terrible loneliness of command, unquote. In The Conscience of the King, Kirk had damned Caridian for coming to a decision such as this, to kill many people so that others may live. The difference, of course, is that Caridian killed healthy people so that others could have food to eat. Kirk kills the infected and suffering, all of whom will die anyway to stop an invasion and keep the suffering from spreading. Nonetheless, it was an ending that was not going to get approved from NBC, or for that matter by Gene Roddenberry, who suggested the premise to Karabatsos, sans the tragic ending. The dark ending was taken out and replaced with something more in keeping with Star Trek. Kirk finds a way to destroy the creatures other than setting the surface of a populated planet ablaze with phaser fire. Regardless, in Karabatso's script, the new ending was still very different from that eventually filmed. There are differences throughout the story. Now, I'm not going to go through everything, but the basic upshot is that in earlier versions of the script, Kirk's brother Sam and his family are not on the planet. This woman Areelan is there, but she's not. Originally, was not Kirk's sister-in-law. She was the people they meet initially are Areelan and her father, and then she has a husband who we meet later. Actually, in the scene, after Spock beams down, let's see, where is it? Yeah, okay. So after Spock beams down to get the specimen, and I didn't put a screenshot in here, but there's a little quick action scene where Spock is attacked by one of the colonists with some kind of tool. And in the earlier versions of the script, that guy was Areelan's husband, actually. But through successive rewrites, he just got his part got whittled down to the point that he was just like a random colonist, and it really didn't matter who he was. Okay. The ending of the Karabatsa script is nothing like that of his original story outline or the filmed episode. Spock, linked to the consciousness of the creature through that which lives within his body, is able to sense that it is a composite organism and that all its subparts are somehow connected and controlled by a gigantic brain. Kirk, taking this a step further, comes up with the hypothesis that the individual cells are mindless, in fact, almost lifeless, and that there is a central concentration of them somewhere. Spock, being in telepathic communication with the creature, is able to direct the Enterprise to the aliens' homeworld, where the epidemic of madness first began centuries earlier. And Kirk orders Sulu to use the weapons on the Enterprise to set fire to the surface of that planet and not Deneva. And the heat and light created by the phasers destroys the central brain. And then once that happens, the creature within Spock dies, and also with all the other colonists as well. But of course, that would get rewritten as well. Stan, recent audience recent audience research told Stan Robertson at NBC that the show needed to open with a bang or that many in the viewing audience might switch channels to get their thrills on another channel, another network. NBC was learning that if you don't hook them fast, you don't keep them. Since Robertson made reference to a Dorothy Fontana script as a prime example of the type of opening he wanted to see more of, Kuhn handed the script off to Fontana for sprucing up. Fontana's script polish, which was on January 24th of 67, tightened the teaser and added in the action, which in the previous draft didn't happen until the start of Act 1. The Enterprise encountering the Denovan ship, which is racing towards that system's sun, and the ship's destruction. Fontana also introduced the creatures into the story sooner than Karabatsos had and eliminated the idea that the entire creature would invade the body of its host. Now, instead, it would simply inject a stinger into living tissue, uh, which would then grow throughout the body. And Fontana added Nurse Chapel into the script as well. The first person to make substantial changes to that rewrite was Gene Kuhn. With his rewrite, which was on February 3rd, the story's ending was retooled. It was here that the idea of having Spock experience blindness was added, and Spock would not be alone. Scotty clumsily also knocks over a specimen case, which frees one of the creatures, which then attacks and inhabits him. So then, in the end, he too is blinded in an effort to remove the alien from his body. Kirk, after wrestling with his conscience, makes the decision to blind all those on Deneva, over 1 million people, to free them from the aliens. It is McCoy, after the fact, who finds a way to surgically repair their eyes, allowing Spock and Scotty to see again. Medics are then sent down to Deneva to begin the process of corrective surgery on the 1 million+ inhabitants of Deneva. Our TNZ says, I'm okay with a less tragic ending. We don't need to see Kirk make a decision like that. Well, yeah, I mean, like they say, that wasn't something that was going to get approved for a network show in the 1960s. That just wasn't going to happen. And yeah, it does very much kind of fly in the face of, this sort of more optimistic tone that the show tends to set. We don't want to see our heroes necessarily. I mean, you want to see them maybe fail sometimes, but seeing them have to, you know, slaughter 1 million people, that's not the kind of failure or setback you want to see them having. Okay. Let's see, where was I? Okay, yeah. Okay, so now Roddenberry was the next one to do a rewrite. Stephen Carabatso says, quote, Roddenberry had wanted to do an episode involving Captain Kirk's brother. Roddenberry removed the character of Mellon. That's one of the guys I mentioned earlier who was in the earlier script, and replacing him with Sam Kirk and having a Reland be Sam's wife and giving them a son, Peter. Even though in the episode What Are Little Girls Made Of, we were told that Sam Kirk has 2 sons. Yeah, well, maybe the older son was off to college or something. I don't know. The character of Cartan remains and still attacks Spock, but it had so little significance and was in and out of the story so fast that his name is never even mentioned. Roddenberry also took out the plot contrivance that had Scotty being attacked and stung by one of the creatures. And he changed the ending. Spock loses his sight, but before Kirk gives the order to blind all those on Deneva, McCoy discovers that only one spectrum of light needs to be used to kill the aliens, one that is not harmful to the human eye. Lastly, Roddenberry added in a reasonable means for Spock to regain his sight due to that never before mentioned Vulcan inner eyelid. Clearly, the script had been improved in many ways, but it had also become kind of crowded. Good ideas do not always help a story, not when there are too many of them. Regardless, Roddenberry, Kuhn, and Fontana felt the script was now better. Roddenberry always believed that scripts got better with rewriting, but at some point, however, too much rewriting leads to overwriting, and that seems to be the case here. Yeah, maybe. I can see what their point here. But like I say, I still really like this one. Herschel Doherty, 56, had been in TV since the early 50s, and he was hired to direct this episode. His resume included 9 episodes of Wagon Train, 15 episodes of Alfred Hitchcock Presents, 16 episodes of Boris Karloff's Thriller, including the episode Grim Reaper, which starred William Shatner. And he was also a frequent director for the anthology series General Electric Theater, where he won the Directors Guild Award in 1957. Doherty would return to Star Trek again for The Savage Curtain. Joan Swift played Aurelin Kirk, Captain Kirk's sister-in-law. Swift's work in TV had been in roles that included such roles as Saloon Girl and Hack Check Girl and Secretary and Stewardess. Operation Annihilate allowed her to scream, writhe in agony, have an hysterical fit, and then die. Craig Hundley played Kirk's nephew. Let me, oh, dang, hit the wrong one. Yeah, here's what I want. Let's go back to them. Okay. Oh, well, you can't see him. Well, when I did a screenshot, you could see it's kind of cut off here, but you could see Kirk's nephew's face, like in Kirk's armpit there. Oh well, never mind. Craig Hundley was 12, and he was busy in television with guest spots on shows such as My Favorite Martian and Bewitched. Immediately after Operation Annihilate, Hundley was added to the cast of The Days of Our Lives. He would return for a bigger role on Star Trek in the episode And the Children Shall Lead. Wat Chang designed the parasite creatures, which James Doohan called flying omelets. Doohan said those things were hurtling around through the air on strings, and when the script called for one of them to smack Spock in the back, it nearly knocked him down. And that's another thing I would point out. And it's not that I want to ding the episode too hard for it, because it is, let's face it, over 50 years old. But and when the scenes where the creatures are kind of flying around, you can kind of see the strings in some shots. Okay. All right. Now, during filming on day 4, the entire day was spent filming on the bridge, including a scene at the end of the episode in which Kirk's nephew Peter is recovered and seemingly happy, despite his parents being dead, I guess, wearing a Starfleet uniform like Kirk's, and sits in the captain's chair. In the dialogue cut from the aired episode, Peter tells Kirk that he wishes to stay on Deneva. And this scene with Peter was subsequently cut from the episode, of course. The acting by the 3 leads, Shatner, Nimoy, and Kelly, and the gamut of emotions that passes among them brings forward a standout moment in this episode. Interviewed at the time, DeForest Kelly said, quote, "I've been told that Dr. McCoy is the balancing rod between the two more extreme characters, Kirk and Spock. Now, McCoy is merely human. At times he feels fear. At times he can perform really dangerous acts. But he's always just a man who feels and thinks and who searches and who makes mistakes. The audience reacts to each of us. They admire Kirk for conquering the faults in our human natures. They're in awe of Mr. Spock, but they sympathize with and relate to Dr. McCoy." On February 22nd of 1967, which is day 7 of filming, the final shots were taken in and about the isolation booth. After filming ended, the cast and crew hung around for a season-end wrap party. And the following night, on Thursday, February 23rd, A Taste of Armageddon aired on NBC. At $196,780, Operation Annihilate came in $11,780 over its studio allocated budget. The first season ended $146,603 in the red, with Mission Impossible also spending more than the studio had wanted. Desilu was in danger of going out of business, which is ironic because both shows were doing well. They were both doing well in the ratings. but they were just so expensive. It's kind of like Battlestar Galactica. They were so expensive that even doing well wasn't good enough. Okay, this episode aired on April 13th of 1967. In the first half hour, Star Trek was second in the ratings. And then in the second half hour, Star Trek was more or less in a virtual tie with the Thursday night movie for the first place. And hello, Maz. What game is this? So this is a screenshot from an old episode of Star Trek, actually, which I'm going to cover in here, not from a video game. Now, in the April 24th, 1967 edition of Daily Variety, the trade published the top 40 list of the latest 30-city Nielsen survey. Star Trek, with its final first-run episode of the season, came in at a respectable number 37 out of 90 primetime shows. So just outside of the top third. Obviously, they would have liked better. And Craig Hundley, who played Kirk's nephew, later said, I was a big fan of Star Trek. In fact, producer Gene Roddenberry wanted me as a regular on the series as Captain Kirk's nephew, Peter. But because of other commitments, I was unavailable. He did ask me back for the third season episode, and the children will lead. And, you wonder, it is interesting to think that even back on the original series, Roddenberry was keen to have a kid hanging around on the ship. And there's a photo in here. I actually should have thought to try and find that if I could, of the kid Craig Hundley, on the bridge with Shatner, and he's sitting in the captain's seat, and it, it does kind of have echoes of Wesley Crusher, and you wonder if even if he had stuck around on the show, would Peter have turned out to be a boy genius and save the ship all the time or something? Fortunately, that didn't happen. Okay. So that'll do it for this episode. Now, as I said, next week I'll probably do a tier ranking of all the first season episodes. And again, probably do a little talk about the state of the show at the end of the first season. And then I guess after that, we'll continue on into the second season. I won't be live streaming this Sunday because I'll be with my National Guard unit. But I guess that will wrap it up. Again, if you haven't, please do like the stream before you leave. And also, please do sub to the channel and check out some of my other videos. And that'll do it for this week. And everyone, I don't know how many of you are in my area of the country, but it's freezing right now where I am. So try to stay warm. And I will see you all next week.